Thank you, Chairman Gowdy, Ranking Member Lofgren, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for inviting me to speak here today on behalf of HIAS, which is the oldest refugee agency in the world. We've been resettling refugees since 1881, not just because it makes us feel better, but because it saves lives. Refugee resettlement has saved millions of lives since 1881, but not nearly enough. We're confronting the world's most horrific refugee crisis since World War II, with 60 million displaced across the globe, 20% of whom are Syrian, fleeing a conflict that has already taken over 240,000 lives. Without considerably more international assistance, countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey are beyond their saturation points, with over 4 million Syrians, causing refugees to risk their lives to flee for a second or a third time. The crisis finally attracted international attention and attention in this country when the body of 3-year-old Syrian Elan Kurdi washed up on a Turkish beach on September 2nd, one of 813 men, women, and children asylum seekers to perish at sea that month, trying to make the perilous journey to Europe. This is an extraordinary crisis requiring extraordinary leadership, but so far the United States' response has been tepid at best. While this is the largest refugee crisis of my lifetime, we're resettling far fewer refugees than we did in 1980, when we resettled over 200,000 Indo-Chinese refugees, or in 1993 and 1994, when we resettled well over 110,000 refugees each year. But my great sadness at the murderous acts of terrorism perpetrated in Beirut and Paris last week has been compounded by the reactions of some politicians in this country. They have diverted the focus away from fighting terrorism and toward keeping refugees out of our country and out of their states. They have blamed the victims. This plays on people's fears, turns prejudice into policy, and weakens our national security and our national character. I mistakenly thought that attitudes and signs like Irish need not apply, no coloreds, no Jews or dogs allowed were ugly relics buried in the past, but apparently not. Governors are clearly saying openly, no Syrian Muslims are welcome in my state. One governor even said, from my home state of New Jersey, no Syrian orphans under 5 were welcome either, which can only recall the ugly debate that occurred in this House in 1939, which resulted in the defeat of the Wagner-Rogers bill, which would have saved 20,000 refugee children from Nazi Germany. Governors are right to be concerned about security, but so is the federal government, so are the refugee resettlement agencies, and the extensive screening process in our refugee program reflects that, as Director Rodriguez has already testified, and as is in my testimony. While the number of Syrian refugees being resettled here today is relatively anemic, the security protocols in place are stronger than anything I have ever seen in my 26 years working in this field. So strong that it has made the refugee resettlement program into more fortress than ambulance, causing massive backlogs of holds of legitimately deserving and unnecessarily suffering refugees. The fear of resettled refugees here is based on erroneous assumptions. The flow of refugees to Europe is entirely dissimilar to the refugees accepted through the U.S. refugee resettlement program. The refugees who arrive in the U.S. have undergone extensive security vetting prior to setting foot on U.S. soil. Refugees to Europe are not screened until after they enter. This is the distinction. It simply does not make sense for U.S. lawmakers to react to the tragedy in Paris by proposing legislative changes to the U.S. refugee program. History has demonstrated that our democracy can not only withstand large influxes of refugees from other countries, but will prosper as a result. When we welcomed millions of refugees from communist, fascist, and Nazi regimes, our country did not become infected with any of these ideologies, nor with the terror associated with them. If anything, these refugees immunized us from the totalitarian ideologies they were fleeing. The U.S. RAP is hardly a piece of Swiss cheese. It is not a sieve, and in essence, it is not even the wide-reaching rescue program that it was intended to be. Given the complexity, intrusiveness, and unpredictability of the program for refugees, it seems highly unlikely, if not impossible, that a terrorist would choose the refugee resettlement program as his or her pathway to the U.S. My written testimony outlines a number of suggestions to improve the program, while increasing both security and efficiency, but it does not recommend a certification process. Thank you for inviting me to testify here today on Syrian refugees. This country must continue to be both welcoming and safe.
Thank you, Mr. Hetfield. I will